I'm Dr. Archie Johnson. In this part 6 of my series on relational neuroscience, I wanted to provide a broad stroke on what needs to be done if we're going to see real change take place, and what difference does it make if we understand neuroscience and brain pathology and things along those lines. I guess my concern is that when I was finishing up my PhD in the clinical and dynamic psychiatric sciences, the behavioral sciences, and clinical professional psychology, I was very much struck by the reality that there was more to do. Medication was the only game in town, so to speak. I was able then to in order to be part of that revolution, and medication, psychopharmacological revolution, or neuropsychiatric revolution, I wanted to learn from the best, and so I was fortunate enough to be able to spend an intensive seminar at Harvard Medical School at Massachusetts General, where all the foremost minds on the planet, people like Dr. Ross Ballerini and many others, were there. Controversial Dr. Joe Biederman and others in pediatric psychopharmacology. He was also one of the presenters, so I was able to get a real intense grounding in psychopharmacology. And it was very important at that time because I was finishing up a postdoctoral fellowship at the Department of Neuropsychiatry at the School of Medicine, and I was also working with 4 medical doctors. I was their expert, so to speak. I was seeing their patients, and you've heard of the clinical hour. My time was so swamped it became the clinical, maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and what we see today is the modern treatment time, which is about 6 or 7 minutes for the typical doctor-patient evaluation. But back in those days, I was really concerned with that there was more to do. More to do in terms of I really want to help patients. I feel like it's been a calling. If you want to know more about that, you can see my Track 1 series available on YouTube. But here for this particular video, I want to essentially deal with in the time that we have. This will be a shorter video. I want to deal with the concerns about what does it mean to be a relational neuroscientist. What does that mean? There's been quite a revolution taking place today as far as the brain and nervous system are concerned. There's just so much information I want to share with you, and of course time will not allow that. But I want to basically share with you a story, and then I'll get into my background and how I want to help my viewing audience understand the role of brain sciences and neurosciences. When I was fortunate enough to be in Los Angeles, by the way, having dinner with some of the retired mega geniuses on the planet in the brain sciences and all the developments that we see today. I was sitting there, and I'm there having coffee. We're having dessert with a bunch of wonderful experts from New York, from Harvard, from Chicago, from just phenomenal men and women. And so there was a young waiter there, who was waiting on us. And so while the elderly retired people are talking brain science and shop, I decided to start up a conversation with this young waiter. And I said, "What are you studying?" He said, "Oh, how'd you know I was a student?" I said, "Well, I'm just kind of guessing. I could tell that you're some kind of a student." He said, "Well, I'm an upper level biological student. I'm studying biology, but I'm really interested in the nervous system. And I'm taking some graduate courses now in the neurosciences." And I said, "What did you learn? Well, what are you learning?" He said, "Well, if it's not too much over your head, sir," he didn't know I was a doctor. He said, "We're learning about the importance of the amygdala. We're learning the most important parts of the cortical structures, and we're learning about orbital frontal filters and things like that." And I go, "Wow, that's pretty heavy stuff." He said, "I'm sorry, that's probably heavy." And I said, "Well, let me explain to you, young man. What you're explaining here about the amygdala and the nervous system and all that stuff. The people who came up with that are sitting at this table. And he looked at me, you can imagine what his expression was. He looked at me and said, "You're kidding." I go, "I'm not kidding at all. I'm not kidding at all." And so I was very, very, I said, "Pull up a chair, by the way." And so he sat down with us while he was waiting on us. It was just a wonderful experience. Folks, my concern is that a lot of what passes off today, and I hear it all the time, about what is the brain doing this and what the left hemisphere is doing this, the right hemisphere doesn't do that, and I'm right-handed, that's because that's why I'm using my right hand, so therefore I'm more right-handed, or I'm more of a creative, I'm an artist, therefore that's why I'm more right-brain oriented. You see, folks, those are truisms, and they tend to be rather surface. The kind of neuroscience I'm talking about is a much more explanatory science that explains to us what each hemisphere is doing, and how when they're not working together, what I call these two brains, then we're not going to see the kind of changes that we need to take place. And therefore, the flip side is true, that if we can understand what each hemisphere is doing, and I prefer it as a two-brain theory, that we have two brains, there are two processors that are working, should be working tandem, side by side, and that if they're not, then we have a problem. Or as I say, Houston, we have a problem, Houston. And so therefore, a lot of the research I'm doing, I'm a clinical neuroscientist, and by that I mean is that I'm not in the laboratory actually seeing patients, in a laboratory doing research along those lines, but I am very much savvy. I know who's doing what, I know the researchers, many were classmates, many were professors. My work is primarily in the clinic, where I see patients one-on-one, and we begin to look at their nervous system, look at their brains, their bodies, and begin to say, okay, here's what we need to do to create something new. And so here's some of the terms that you've heard in other videos that I produced. One of the terms is when we learn to fire together, we can rewire together and survive together. Now that was discovered by a geneticist named Hebb, Dr. Hebb, and he discovered that in the 50s. This Hebb theory of genetics, when two people learn how to fire together, they can rewire together and survive together. This theory then began to lead to now what we call epigenetics. I believe, it's my opinion, that epigenetics now will trump and supersede the Mendel view of genetics that's still taught in most schools, medical schools, and around the country, around the world. The epigenetic theory is now the best game in town, the latest thing that explains how, what I'm talking about. If you look at the term genetics, and you look at the term epi, the Greek preposition epi means something that's on top of, something that is actually moving the genetics in a particular way. And the endophenotypes and the phenotypes, which, again, not to get too complicated here on this video, but that's exactly what the epigenetics is all about. What turns them on and what can turn them off, so to speak. Now, what's happening is that in the terms of the modern neurosciences, it has to be a relational enterprise. And if it's not relational, then I think we're going to be left with what I'm seeing taking place today in the world of modern medicine. If you'd like to see a recent critique I've written about, I call it the relational turn in modern medicine. And you could look that article up under my post, Dr. Archie Johnson at WordPress, the relational turn in modern medicine. There is a relational turn, and this relational turn, unfortunately, hasn't caught up with, in terms of law, as I'm trained in law as well. It hasn't caught up yet in the world of law. That's for a different video that I'll get into that. When I recently spoke to district attorneys, and they said, we've heard about you guys who are trying to bring in neuroscience and law and put them together. He says, you know, Doc, we don't easily change us lawyer likes. And I said, well, my goal is to change every one of you, one person at a time. And I think the information today in terms of neuroscience and law are also part of what I'm calling the relational term. But that's, again, for a different time and a different video. So the relational component has to be related to how do we connect? What is this connection idea all about? This is what I mean by relationship. We are wired to connect. We settle for disconnection, and I want to teach us how to do reconnection. This is what my predecessors taught me, and this is why I've been saying in both tracks of my videos that I'm providing an upgrade from what my former professors taught me, and I'm taking it up to the meta level, to the next level. That relationship is necessary, that we have to be relational if we're going to turn on the right genetics, and that we're going to do it in neurobiological ways. I have a friend who's an OB/GYN who called me, and he wanted to refer a patient. And his name's Dr. John. And he said, Doc, I want to recommend a patient to you. She's going through depression, she's got anxiety issues, and I want to refer her to you and make an appointment for her. I said, thank you, Dr. John. I need a partner, by the way. Would you come in and be a partner for me? He goes, I'm not good at all that psychological stuff, that psychiatric stuff. He said, that's why I'm sending him to you. And I said, well, wait a minute. Well, let me explain to you. And I gave him this long sentence. He's a doctor on the other end of the phone. He's a physician. And so I said to him, emotions are medical substrates. Emotions are neurobiological substrates. And he said to me, Dr. Archie, I have no idea what you're talking about. And he said, that's why I'm sending him to you, because I have no idea. And I don't have time or interest, is what he said. So he laughed. We both had a little chuckle. But I said, we'll have to sit down and talk sometime. Folks, what we don't know, of course, we don't know what we don't know. But today there's an explosive amount of information, and there's a lot of misinformation, whether it's online, whether it's, we find something that just has enough truth, but it doesn't cover all the bases, or what I would call, it's not very comprehensive. So what's comprehensive is that the lower part of the nervous system, here's a little anatomy for you anatomy buffs. The lower part of the nervous system, or what a doctor like me calls subcortical, is fairly online in the third trimester of the infant's life. We now know that the infant has an amygdala. The amygdala is about the size of a jelly bean, and it's been now discovered under neuroimaging, can do a lot of those under functional neuroimaging because of the radiation. That's why we now are using transcranial magnetic stimulation, because we don't have to worry so much about the radiation. But what the neuroimaging has detected is that there's something about the size of a pea, a size of a good jelly bean, and it's on the right side, on the left side of the brain. So if you want to put your fingers up here, under your ears, on both sides, you're touching the amygdala. The amygdala is wired, it's part of our subcortical. So if you think of the hand illustration, that we have three parts to the nervous system. We've got the part where my wrist is, and we've got the middle part where we're feeling. This is called the hypothalamus. And then where my fingers are, now we have the cortical states. A scientist in the 70s at Princeton University discovered this, and he talked about the triune brain. We don't follow him. I don't follow Dr. McLean much because of the more current information has much more superseded the simplicity of that three kinds of parts of the brain. And so therefore it's helpful for an illustration like maybe the hand, that we have three parts working to my nervous system, that I have all three parts, and so do you, my viewer, today. So when a friend of mine, a very leading attorney in the country, when he says to me one day, and in front of his friends, our friends, his wife, and a bunch of friends, he says, you know, Doc, you talk about this relational neuroscience stuff. He said, I'm not a relational guy. I'm just not a relational guy. And I said to him, he's a good friend, we could tease each other, and I said to him, that's because you're a lizard. That's because you're a lizard. And then I said, because the part of your brain that's right here where my wrist is at, that's what's in control for you. But the same is true for you, John, as it is for me. We're wired to be relational. And that if we don't understand the skills of what it's like to be relational, then we may rely on the subcortical parts of my brain. And that would be below the amygdala. And the amygdala then would cause all kinds of problems when it's not regulated or rewired in the right sort of way. So what are the four patterns of the amygdala? When my amygdala is turned on, when yours is turned on, remember it's in the lower part of the brain. It's a pea-shaped size, and there are two of them. The one on the right side, the right hemisphere, turns on. It gets heated up when we start feeling a lot of stress. When I start getting upset, the amygdala turns on, and when it turns on, then I potentially will do one of four things. Think of 4 F's. We may have talked about this on a previous video, but here's just again a quick summary. The 4 F's are, the amygdala will do 4 things. It's in every human nervous system, and it's even in every mammal as well, and in invertebrates too in a lot of ways, which we won't get into at the moment. But the 4 F's represent this. I will fight when my amygdala is turned on. I will flee. I will have anxiety states. I'll take off. I'll get out of dodge, as we say. Or I will faint if necessary, as a lot of medical doctors tell me, that just the thought of giving a lecture like this or standing up in front of a microphone would cause them to faint. And many have told me that they pass out at the thought, or actually when they're giving a lecture. And I say to them, well, that's your amygdala, and your amygdala is getting turned on. So first we have the first step, fight, flight, faint, and now we have the 4th F, which is freeze. I had a young man who said to me that he saved up his money because he wanted to come see me, and he had to save up all his pennies and dimes and nickels, and he said, I found something that helps until I can get to you, doctor, so you can rewire me. And I said, what'd you find out? He said, if I stay in my freezer for a couple hours a day, actually it's Dad's freezer, if I hide in the freezer, I said, you're kidding, you actually do that? He said he slams the door to the freezer and he stays in for about 2 hours a day on his dad's back porch. And I said, young man, don't ever do that again. Don't ever do that again. But then I asked, are you kidding? You actually do this and it worked? He goes, yeah, it works. I started to feel less stressed and to less anxious. And so, but the problem is I started getting freezer burn and it started getting too cold. And I said, promise me you will never do anything like that again. And you can't make this stuff up. You actually can't. So relational neuroscience is about teaching men and women how to rewire the nervous system. And if you think of the brain as a duplex, we've got an upstairs and the downstairs, that we now know more than ever, it's the downstairs that's doing all the automation for us. If you think of it this way, that the human brain can only keep about 7 bits of information conscious. 7 bits, which is about 5% of the brain's capacity. Our ability to function is related to only 5% of the things that we really, really need consciousness for. What does that mean? That means the flip side is that 95% of what I'm doing, and even this lecture, is automated. I'm in automation. It's because of study time, learning, like riding a bicycle, in the motor part of the brain. This is motor memory, we say. This is not episodic memory. It's not memory that if I asked you, what did you do yesterday? What did you eat yesterday? It's not that I'm remembering this. But once the nervous system, when this information goes into the automation side of the brain, then we're using 95% of consciousness to actually maintain it without being repressed. So consciousness really is that we don't need to be very conscious, and I'll devote some time to that in a future video, what I mean by that. But in terms of relational neuroscience, it's very, very important that we learn how to connect together. And that when a patient tells me that she comes home from school and there's her dad sitting there reading the newspaper for the first time. Dad was a judge and he didn't come home very much in the afternoons. And so when she jumps into his lap and she said, Daddy, I just got the leading part of the school play. And he says, I want to see your math scores. I want to see what you did on your science test. that little girl said that my dad was always like this, and I felt so disconnected from him. Dad was never really into what my experience was, my feelings were. And I said, therefore your dad was what I call a very dysregulated dad. Or the little girl who her dad would always promise her, I'm picking on dads, aren't I? But her dad would always promise to take her to the zoo and to the circus. So one Saturday morning she woke him, said, Daddy, it's time to go to the zoo. It's time to go to the circus. And he threw across the room, and she was about 11, threw across the room. And for the first time she connected that when Dad was making all these promises to her, that he was an alcoholic, that he was probably drunk, and didn't realize that his promises were not meant to keep. What do we say? Overpromise and underdeliver. Her father was an alcoholic, and now she began to see for the first time as a little girl that this is the kind of dad that she grew up with. So folks, this kind of relational mandate, this kind of framework, deeply affects the nervous system. It impacts the nervous system, and it causes the nervous system to dysregulate. And I don't have the time, of course, to give you all the scientific research to show that what I'm saying to you is scientific. It's not an opinion. It's not Dr. Archie's opinion. It's actual scientific fact. So I would refer you to my posts at Dr. Archie Johnson WordPress, or I refer you to my Talking Cure, my 2 books on this, and I actually will have a book coming out this year, hopefully. And it'll be integrating the relational components and what neuroscience can teach us. Not the neuroscience that maybe is being popularized today, not the neuroscience that we're hearing as very important for a lot of ways. This is a neuroscience that's very, very in-depth, that actually is explaining how the nervous system works. And as a result of that, we have a new way to understand how relationships and the brain together can actually rewire together. But let me say, it takes skills to be able to learn how to connect together, to relate in ways that can rewire the nervous system. Actually takes training. It's nothing that happens automatically. We actually need the skills, we need to take the time to be able to do that. So here's the challenge. Everybody who's going to see a medical provider, a physician, a clinician, a psychologist or a psychiatrist or a mental health expert, they need the best of both worlds. They need to understand the relational components that have made up their nervous system and that are existing now in real time. It's not about digging up the past. It's not about digging up things that have been now buried a long time ago. No, it's not about that at all. It's about dealing in real time today, that what impact has living in this world with maybe disconnected people. How have they impacted my nervous system, and how have they impacted yours? And now with the kind of knowledge we have, the kind of technology we have to rebuild nervous systems, then we can now make a difference, and we can create a talking cure. You see, folks, genetics are not our destiny. What we're hearing today in medical ways, it's all about genetics. That's not true. We now know that what's turning on the genetics, I would suggest from a scientific perspective, is this relational breakdown. We know this now in so many ways. So let me leave you with this quick point for this very brief video. The 4-point, think of a 4-piece puzzle that whenever there's symptoms, piece 1, piece of the puzzle 1, when I have symptoms, then they're going to point me to a number of different things that I need to know the other 3 pieces of the puzzle. The second piece is how secure attached I am. As I mentioned in a previous video, let's not settle for S, A, D, D, S. S to the A to the 3rd power and D to the 2nd power. So the second piece of the puzzle will be I'm going to be avoiding in my attachment style. I'm going to be anxious in my attachment style. I'm going to be ambivalent in my relational ways. So the first S means in SADS, I want to be secure. The nervous system needs to be secure. It needs to have a good balance. Think of BIER. I need to have balance in my nervous system. I need to have the insight on what makes nervous systems tick. I need to have empathy, mind sharing, that we can go online together, mentalization mentally, as some of my friends are doing in London, and terms of developing the research for this. And then the R, then I can be resilient. So I can bounce back in the middle of life, in the middle of stress. As a mom told me this morning, that when she's taken her 5-year-old out of the stress, that his skin condition, his rash, his eczema has now dissipated. It's now going away. And she said, Doc, it's incredible that you're saying that the homeostatic stress overload is doing this. I said, absolutely. Now that we know we've got 2 brains working, 3.5 years old, we've got the 2 hemispheres, left brain, right brain working, first time online in the first 3 years, 3.5 years of life, and so now your child is 5, how is he dealing with the stress? So in order to know how to regulate, how to rewire each other together, we need an understanding of what makes relationships and the neuroscience work together. So the first piece in the puzzle was I need to know what my symptoms are. And that's why coming to see me is essential. And my tease again is this: half the people I know need to see me, and the other half just don't know it yet. So that's piece 1. Piece 2 is that my nervous system may not be so secure. And so therefore, if it's not secure, it's not about trying harder, it's not about being tougher, it's not about being weak. It's that the nervous system has to be secure, internally and externally. And I'll say more about that in the next video. And so that's piece number 2. How secure am I feeling on upstairs and downstairs? Remember, the brain is a duplex. There's an upstairs and a downstairs. And the downstairs is what controls my body, the somatic forms, the neurobiology of the nervous system. Again, for a topic for another video. So that's piece number 2, how secure am I feeling? Piece number 3, what are my arousal levels in the brain? Think of the brain as having hyper arousal. Think of a gas pedal. My gas pedal is stuck. I'm stressed, I'm tense, I'm bipolar, I'm manic. That would be hyperarousal. Hypoarousal, I feel depressed. I feel I can't move. I'm frozen. I'm maybe amygdala type 5, those 4 Fs. So the brain, the nervous system, goes into arousal levels. Too much stress, hyper. When I'm stuck, depressed, feeling sluggish, then I'm in hypoarousal. And that would be the 4th piece of the puzzle. So we need to know what our symptoms are. We need to know how secure our nervous system, what kind of shape it's in. And by the way, that's why I don't have contractors come to my house for dinner or lunch, because they're always seeing something wrong. You got to fix that molding, you got to fix that. See, I do the same sort of thing. And when I tell doctors the kind of doctor I am, I tell them I'm a neuroplastician. I'm a neuroplastician. I want to rewire people. So the second piece would be what security is going on in my nervous system. 3, what kind of arousal levels do I have? Am I hyper, hypo? And then number 4, piece 4, what kind of work do we need to do to get the system, the brain, the mind, the body in all good shape? Remember, the mind is the only subject, the person that we're talking to. This is the relational depository for our experiences, and the mind is not a subject. The mind, I should say, let me retract that. The mind is a subject, it's not an object. The brain is an object, and the body is an object. And unless these 3 are working together, linked together, and regulating together, then we have a problem, NASA. The relational neuroscience is the way to fix everything that's going on in the duplex of our human existence. There's a new way to do it. We have to get on the road to the relational turn. And we have to make that road, have that turn. And don't miss that turn, because you might wind up somewhere else, maybe 100 miles away than where you attended in the first place. We have a new algorithm now to learn how to do it. It takes regulating and rewiring together. And so for this video, think about this, and in our next one, we'll start putting in some of the deeper pieces of the mechanics, of the apparatus, of the mental and medical apparatus, and how to regulate each other on all 3 levels, mind, brain, and body. Take care, and see you soon.